Hi, this is Kyle Haynes with Technically Speaking at Source Allies, and today we're going to talk about function calling in SpringAI. SpringAI is one of the newest libraries in the Spring ecosystem that allows you to write your Java applications that interact with large language models. Think of taking your existing Java application and adding AI functionality, like talking to OpenAI's GPT-4o or Anthropic's Claude. All of those are very possible thanks to SpringAI when you put those in your applications. So the thing we're going to talk about today is function calling. If you haven't heard about it before, function calling is a great way to kind of extend the capabilities of large language models. And we're going to take an example here and talk about how and why I would use function calling, and then we'll show an example in code of interacting with that API. So let's dive in quick. We're going to talk here about a common example of function calling, which is going to be getting the current weather, right? So if I want to talk to a LLM, the LLMs are trained up to a certain date. So for example, we're going to be using GPT-4o in this example in a bit, and that code was cut off. The training was done in October of last year. They'd have no idea what the current weather, for example, is in a location. So we can use function calling to extend the capabilities of the LLM and allow us to get things like the weather. In this example here, you'll see we have a user that asks, what's the current weather in Urbandale, Iowa, here where Source Allies is located? What's going to happen is we're going to have a SpringAI application, and that SpringAI application is going to call off to the LLM, and it's going to say, hey, here's the question the user asked, and also if you need it, I have a tool or a function that can get you the weather if you need it. You don't have to use it, but I have it if you would like to use it. The LLM is going to receive that question and say, oh, you know what? I do want to use that weather tool that you've talked about. Here's the parameters I've got. I know it's going to be Urbandale, and I know it's going to be Iowa, and I'm going to provide that back to you. And me, as the SpringAI application, our weather function, can interact with maybe a third-party weather API to go get the weather at that location, return that data to the LLM saying, here's that weather info you wanted, and then the LLM can go through its processing and determine whatever response it would like to make to the user. And so the user, it looks like one call, but in reality, there's a little bit of a back and forth between the LLM and your application. And so that's the flow of function calling. So we're going to dive into code here. So if you haven't seen it already, we already have a big deep dive into an introduction to SpringAI on a Source Allies YouTube account, so you can go check that out if you'd like. We are going to kind of skip forward towards the end of where we would have that demo and talk about function calling. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a sports API. We're going to be able to ask it a question. So the goal of our question is we're going to say, who's the best team in college football? We all know, living in Iowa, that it's the Iowa Hawkeyes, and they're the best team in college football. So we're going to start it up, the app that we have it right now. That should start up. We can run it, and I'm pretty sure it'll tell us it's not the Iowa Hawkeyes, which is unfortunate. It says, hey, determining the best team is hard. It can vary depending on a lot of criteria. As of the end of the 2023 season, Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, they were pretty consistently strong contenders, but we don't really know who the best team is right now, which makes sense, right? It's kind of like the weather. We don't know who the best team in college football is. We don't know the current weather and the location, so let's fix that. The way that Spring does this is kind of, intelligent, I think. They use built-in functions. So we have, in the Java language ecosystem, we have a thing called a function, and that function is an interface that takes in some sort of request and returns some sort of response. It's an in and it's an out. What Spring allows us to do is we just implement function with what we want to come in as a request and what we would like to go out as a response. So we're going to build a best team function. In the request, it'll be maybe the question that gets asked by the user comes in, and the response will just be the name of the team that is the best team. So all we have to do is, since we implement the interface, we just override the apply method, and we're going to return a new response, and we'll just say Iowa is the best team. I'm also going to log in here just so we can see that it was called. All right, so there's the function. Now, how do we tie it in with the rest of our application? So what we need to do is we need to make ourselves a bean. And so we need to make a bean which allows us to have, of all the functions that are inside our application, this to be the one instance of this function, basically. So we're going to make a bean, and we're going to make a public function of best team function.request to best team function.response, and we'll call it best team. And inside there, we need to return a new best team function. And that's it. Once we have the bean, we're also going to do a little bit of extra fanciness here. So Spring uses this description annotation, this Spring Framework context annotation. This description annotation is used for us to describe to the LLM what our function does. So we're going to say, use this function if you need to determine the current best team in college football, for example. And what will happen is when we provide this function to the LLM, it will also include this description, and so the LLM will know whether or not it needs to potentially use that to help it solve its problems. The other thing we have is a REST controller. So this is where we were calling in earlier. We were making an HTTP post request to ask some sort of sports question, and we're going to talk about how you're an expert college football analyst asking questions about college football. And we're going to pass in the user message. This is the question provided from the HTTP request, and as well as the system message to kind of put some guardrails around things. And that all goes into this prompt, and the prompt is what we send off to the chat model to actually make the HTTP call and invoke the LLM. Once we start doing function calling, the prompt needs to include the system messages, but we're also going to include some extra parameters, extra metadata about the functions. So there's an OpenAI chat options builder, and you say with functions, and you can give it a set of the name of the functions and build it. So this is really just the name of the functions, like best team. That best team name lines up with the name of this method here, best team. So if those two line up and the description is present, it should all work together. And so now when we call off to the LLM, we'll also say, hey, I also have this best team function you could utilize if you'd like to see it. So if we pull back up our HTTP file and we ask it who the best team is in college football, if it worked this time, we should see the best team in college football right now is the Iowa Hawkeyes. Excellent. Is that true? Probably not. But for this example, we'll pretend that it is. You should be able to see too, if I start back up the log, we should be able to see that the best team function was called. All right, so that's pretty cool. The next step forward in that I want to show off is how we can chain these together. So right now we have a best team function, and that's cool. It doesn't really do much. It just says Iowa. You can do, like I was saying earlier, we're in the Spring ecosystem. We can do some cool stuff. So the thing I want to show you is, let's just call an HTTP call. So I have, instead of best team function, we also have a live score function. And so what this does is, I've already built this, but this takes in a request with a team name and takes one of the Big Ten football teams. So we'll say Iowa in this example, and it'll actually make an HTTP request off to some REST client to go get all the games that have happened for that team in the 2024 season and figure out what the score of their most recent game was. So we can utilize that in the exact same way that we had previously used with the best team function. So if we go back to our function calling config, all we do is make another bean, we give it a description, determine the score of a live game of college football. If I could spell this morning, college football. And we'll do maybe a public function of a live score function dot request to live score function dot response, and we'll call it live score. It already knows what I want to do. And then this needs to take in a REST client bean because we are going to make an HTTP call, and then we'll return a new live score function given that REST client. And then again, the only other thing we have to do is we have to tell the model when we build it that we have a best team and we also have a live score function. So if we restart the app, I should be able to go back to here, and I should be able to ask what was the score of the Ohio State game last weekend. And if I run that, we should get Ohio State played against Purdue and beat them 45-0. That's pretty cool, right? Now, the thing that's interesting that Spring will do for us and the LLM will do is, because we have multiple functions, right? We have the best team function and we also have the live score function. We can combine those. So if we want to say what was the score of the football game for the best team in college football last weekend, and we run that, it should tell us the score of the Iowa football game, and it should call us twice. Last weekend, the best team in college football, Iowa, played UCLA, and the score was UCLA 20 and Iowa 17. So unfortunately, we lost, but because it is an LLM, we can change it and add 50 points to a score if we want to. Because LLMs aren't always correct, and sometimes you kind of need to help them a little bit. So if we run it again, we should see that the Hawkeyes were victorious. We won. Look at that. So that's a quick review on function calling in SpringAI. Allows you to really make some cool things and tie together your internal applications, your internal tools. Maybe you have an orders service, or maybe you have something that looks at claims or insurance policies or something like that. You can make really great tie-ins here and provide maybe in a chatbot or provide users information that they're looking for. And so hopefully this has been informational for you. Again, if you're in the Spring ecosystem and looking to get into AI development, function calling is something that's really, really cool. You can extend LLMs to provide information specific to your use case. For example, if I'm doing sales, I have somebody chatting and asking for what's the status of my order number. That's something you could look up in your API and provide information for. If you have claims in an insurance system, that's something you could look up quickly and provide somebody information for. And using this kind of a pattern with function calling is one approach you could take to utilize LLMs, stay in the Spring ecosystem, and help propel your company forward. So again, this has been Kyle Haynes speaking technically with Source Allies. If there's something you'd like to see us cover, please comment it down below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.